Hi everyone and welcome to another in my 12 Journals of 2016 series, and this is where I play along with Tim Holtz's 12 tags of 2016, only I'm not really making a tag, I'm going to make a page based on the tag that he's made. So it's all about playing along, getting creative, looking at some of the techniques that Tim shares with us and feeling inspiration generally. Now I've been playing along for quite some time and I've made quite a few tags, so I decided this year to still play along because I always enjoy it, and instead of making tags, although there is a tag in this little project, I'm making journal pages which I will bind together at the end of the series, and I'll show you exactly how to do that. Now I have made a decision, so these are the pages I've got completed so far. You can see I'm a bit behind this year. So I've decided to make 2 books or 2 volumes for my year's pages. So I've actually got 1 page left in this first 6 months, so I'm going to be doing my April page in order to finish off or join together that first volume. So this was Tim's tag way back in April, and there was a kind of wood grain effect that he had going on in his techniques, and he also mixed together that with a tile technique. Now I remembered that because it's one of the very first tags that I ever made and joined in with. It was well before I started videoing, and this was that tag, and I have never shared this as a sort of technique video, so I'm literally going to use my own inspiration, if you like, to create my page. I really like how this turned out. I think it I can't remember the name of that Spanish tiler, is it Gaudi? Who did a lot of lovely tile work. It's along those lines, except you're using papers and you're making a tile effect. And I've got this lovely book that I haven't touched of tiny red, white and blue and a little bit of turquoise print, and I thought they kind of reminded me of tea party mix and match plates. I don't know why, that's just the sort of thing that popped into my head, but they've got a lovely small print which is ideal for making this tile mosaic. So I'm just flicking through the patterns and picking the smallest ones really, because they're the ones that are going to work the best, because we're going to be working with teeny tiny bits of paper. And I would say to you that you don't have to cut into brand new sheets as I'm doing here. I just wanted a collection of papers that were easy to get to and use already pre-mixed and matched, if you like, so it took a little bit of the effort out of the pages. So I think I pick out about 5 prints in all. So the trick is that your paper mosaics are small, so any of the prints that you choose to mix and match together should be a small sized print, otherwise they just become blotches of colour rather than actual little pieces of what we're trying to make, little pieces of pottery tile effect on our mosaic work. You can see I've never touched this book, so I've still got plenty left. It's a first edition paper pack, and they're all sort of slightly card weight, which makes them a little bit easier to work with. So I definitely recommend getting out your card scraps rather than your paper scraps, because you're going to be gluing them down, so that makes them a little bit more sturdy, and you're also going to be using glossy accents. So all my videos start with my page. So the dimension of the page is 10¼ by 7 inches, and then I've scored it at 5 inches from the left and 5 inches from the right, and that creates this gusset. And that gusset is very important on this page because a lot of the tags that Tim does includes embellishments and things, and I want my pages to include embellishments, and that gusset not only is going to be able to be used to attach it to the actual book itself when I cover this, but it also allows me to use more dimensional products on my page. As well as my page, I've also got my tag, which measures 6 inches by 5¼ inches. All of my tags have some sort of decoration across the top, and I'm thinking of a strip of tiling, and I'm probably going to go with a slight curve, not quite sure what yet. These are just little sketches that I'm making before I get started, so I get a rough idea of where I'm going with the layout. You have already seen the tag I'm going to be basing this upon. I'm just sort of thinking, where would I put my butterflies and where will the trails be? And I'm not going to show you too much of this because actually it looks nothing like this by the time I've finished. But it's just a good idea just to get something going in your head, to have a little sketch on your page before you get started. As usual, I'll share the link to Tim's tag so you can see the actual techniques that he used. Now I'm going to be using a slightly different technique to create my wood grain effect, so if you want to have a look at an alternative, if perhaps you haven't got a wood grain stencil, then you could pop over to his blog and see what he did. So this is basically a resist technique, and you can do this with any kind of stencil. I'm using a perfect medium re-inker, and I'm adding some of what is in effect kind of sticky ink onto a piece of foam, and then I'm pouncing it through my stencil. Don't drag it, as I will attempt to do here shortly, because it just catches on the stencil and bends the pieces up, and you don't want to do that. So stick with the pouncing, and you want enough pressure that it pushes the ink through the stencil, but not so much pressure that you squidge it, if that makes sense. You also need to make sure you hang onto your stencil, because this is quite a sticky ink, so it's kind of lifting the stencil a little bit each time I pounce. But if you hang on to that, make sure it stays stationary, and just keep pouncing and making sure that you cover the entire stencil. And I do this a couple of times, making sure I don't miss any spots, although this actual pattern would be forgiving if I did. And you can't actually see anything at the moment on camera, but the minute I add the white embossing powder, which also could be clear embossing powder, that would work the same on a white background card, which I'm using here, and then you heat emboss it. So you're melting the embossing powder, and as the embossing powder melts, you move your heat gun over your piece of work until you have melted all of the embossing powder. If you stay too long in one place, you're likely to either overheat and sort of dull your embossing powder, or you will actually singe and burn your card if you're not too careful. So as soon as you see that turn and goes shiny, then move on. So I'm going to be doing that over my entire piece of card, and obviously because the tag is double-sided, I'm going to have to do that on the other side. But I'm not really going to make you sit through all of that, so enough said that I am going to repeat and replace the stencil several times, or twice on the tag and several times to cover the actual journal page itself. So pouncing the ink through the stencil, adding the embossing powder, and then heat embossing. And now, to make the resistor reveal itself, I'm going to be using my Distress inks. You could spray ink over this if you wanted to, but I like working with my Distress inks. I'm using my ink blending tool, and I'm going to gradually build up the colour. This is chipped sapphire Distress ink over the entire piece of cardstock. And you will see I've got lots of opportunities to add other colours into this, so I could stick with quite a pale colour, which is what I've got here. At first I think I'm going to go darker to offset or make all those pattern papers stand out, but you'll see I do change my mind part the way through this. So as well as adding the blue, as you add the ink, you can then just use a piece of kitchen roll to remove any excess ink from on top of that embossing. And you can also add in other colours. So I start out by adding in a little bit of frayed burlap, thinking I want to go a little bit grungy and make this wood look a bit distressed and aged. But you will see I do change my mind part the way through this. So the trick is just to keep adding that ink and blending in the different colours that you want to use until you get the look of wood you're going for. And I think that you'll agree, because of the white grain, it looks a little bit beachy already. And I'm just using a wet wipe and a piece of kitchen roll to just remove the ink from the embossing powder. Now I am going to have to do exactly the same on the opposite side of this piece of paper and also to my journal page. So a little while later, this is where the journal page is at. And it was at this point I felt that it needed to have a little bit of that turquoise colour in amongst the inking that I have done already, and that is because of the turquoise in the papers themselves. There was a little bit of the dark blue, but there was also quite a lot of the turquoise, and I felt that needed to be there to complement the tile work that I'm going to be doing. But it was at this point that I felt that things were perhaps a little bit dark, and I decided on one of my favourite techniques, which was to gesso over the whole lot and come up with this slightly lighter version. And I felt the papers plus the black grouting that I intended to use would look nicer. So how am I going to lighten this now I've got it to this stage? I'm going to take a layer of gesso and wash over the top of the whole piece. So anyone who has watched my videos before will have seen me do this technique. It works really well for blending in backgrounds. So just removing the ink first of all to make sure that wood grain is well and truly revealed. And then this gesso layer is all about just blending the wood grain with the background colour that I've chosen. Now I'm going to mix the gesso with a little bit of water to create more of a wash, and I'm also adding a little bit of the Peacock Feathers Distress ink so I get a little bit more of that turquoise going on. So sometimes I'm just going to use more of the white, and sometimes I'm using a little bit more of the turquoise just to create a sort of layered look of the colours. So some patches are a little bit more turquoisey than others. And you can see that how lovely that just blends that background a little bit, so it's a little bit less in your face and even more beachy in my opinion. So I was really pleased with how this turned out, so I'm going to work that over the entire page. Now whenever you're doing this technique, if you feel that you've gone a little bit overboard and perhaps not used a thin enough wash of the gesso and things have gone a little bit too white, just take a piece of kitchen roll while it's damp and remove it, or if it's still a little bit stubborn, just use a baby wipe and you'll be able to lift that gesso whilst it's still, you know, setting really, and you will be able to lighten it slightly or lighten the lightening effect. But I'm quite happy with that how it is, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm just adding a little bit more turquoise into a few areas by adding a little bit of ink over the gesso. And then I'm going to put that to one side to dry and work on covering both sides of the tag in exactly the same way. So that's everything done and nice and dry, and now I'm going to sketch again the butterfly trails where I'm going to make the mosaic work. So once again, my technique is a little bit different to Tim's because I want a black grout effect. So if you want to perhaps follow his exact technique, you would just follow the link down below and check out the tag that he made when he did his mosaic work. So the idea behind this is to create a layer that will act as the grout once you put that paper mosaic down. So it's kind of like working in reverse. If you tile, you add the tiles first and then you grout. And the thing that I want to achieve is a sort of textured look. Tim, I think, has a product for this. I can't remember whether it's an embossing powder or some kind of paste, but definitely pop over there and check out if you want to know the details. This is my version, so I'm using a black chalk paint, and I'm also using Tim Holtz's Distress embossing powder, which is kind of grainy, and it's supposed to dry grainy so that you can release some of those crystals and make it look less than perfect, which is that sort of distressed look that you like to go for with Tim's products. Now I found that as I was doing this, because I've already got that layer of embossing in the white, it kept peeking through. So I persevered with the heating up of the Distress embossing powder, and which obviously dried the chalk paint, which I used to actually stick it to the paper. So I'm working in sections, and I had to do 2 layers to get the sort of texture that I wanted. And then once I'd heat set it, the white came through again. So I just quickly went back over with the chalk paint just to fill in the areas where I had the white bleeding through from the white embossing underneath. So I still ended up with a lovely black layer, but with all the texture created by that kind of gritty, sandy embossing powder that is Distress embossing powder. So I'm going to do that process on both of my sort of butterfly trails. I've got 2 butterfly trails going on this piece of paper, and I'm also doing a piece across the top of the tag. So once again, I'm filling it in with the chalkboard paint. Now, because my room's quite dry and warm, nice and cozy in fact, because it's freezing outside today, and I literally, once I've got my shape how I want it, want to keep the paint wet so that I can add that embossing powder. So you can see I'm just quickly wetting everything again so that when I add the embossing powder that it sticks to the paint. Don't forget to get rid of any extra little pieces that land on your paper where you don't want them, so that you get a nice clean finish. So again, you can see how that white appears even though I've got the paper angled slightly. You can see as I put that down where the white has come back through. And because I learnt from the first time that I did this, I needed to keep the paint wet in order to get enough distress powder on there. I only needed to do 1 layer of embossing this time round, and then added the 2nd layer of the paint just to fill in or colour over where that white embossing powder showed through. So I've now got a lovely black area ready to add my mosaic tile work. So just checking for any white spots. And although you can't see it on camera, that feels lovely and gritty, a bit like sandpaper once it's done. So I've done one side of my tag, and all my tags have the detail at the top because it has a picture on one side of Tim's tag, the original inspiration for the work that I've done on the page, and on the other side a memory, as you will see. So the next thing that we're going to do is create our little paper tiles, and this is the fun part. I'm going to be creating or working with strips of pattern paper, so I'm just going to cut myself out a bunch of tile stock ready. So I've cut some of my paper in 1/4 of an inch strips and some of my paper in 1/2 inch strips, and then I'm going to mix and match them. So I start out by being very neat and putting my patterns in little piles, but that's not how they end up, as you will see as we go along. So I'm going to show you the technique for the paper tiles, but I'm not going to make you sit through the entire thing. And the reason for that is, well, it does take quite a while to sort your tiles out to be the right sizes, to trim them down and to put them in place. And it is quite nice to work fairly accurately to get a nice finish. You don't have to be perfect, but you do kind of need to have that sort of grout effect quite make it as nice and neat as you can without being too fussy. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and try not to go off camera too often so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Because I'm following a specific shape and I want to do it in lines of tile work, I'm having to trim each one of these tiles individually. So I'm working in random strips, and then I'm marking the top and the bottom of the piece that I want to cut by placing the paper strip where it's going to sit. And then I'm trimming that, adding a little bit of glue, and then popping it into place. The trimming is actually going on off camera. I'm just using a pair of scissors and cutting where I've made my marks. So once again, I'm just drawing the shape of the piece that I want to cut, trimming it down with my scissors, and remembering which way around you cut it, gluing it into place. Now make sure that you use a glue that dries clear, because you will get little bits of glue squeezing out the side of your tile, and the flatter that you can glue your tile down, the more likely you're going to get a really nice effect. And I'm having to sort of slightly twist these strips as I work my way around the curve, but then I will come back in and fill any of the larger spaces with little triangles of the patterned papers. So create little fill-in tiles as I go. So I'm not worried too much as I start off. So again, you can see I'm just marking the top and bottom of the tiles that I want to use, trimming them off and gluing them into place. Now the reason that I'm creating my pieces in this way is because I want them to follow in kind of a striped pattern around the curve. So I'm just creating a little fill-in piece here. So I just take off a little bit at a time until I get the size of tile that I want, which is exactly what you do with a real tile, except you'd be using little tile snips to gradually pinch away pieces of tile until you had the piece that fitted into your mosaic. If you're working on a bigger surface and you just want to create a random pattern, so I'm going to fill those bits in later. If you want to create more of a random pattern, you can just create random shapes of paper to start with. Start placing those and fitting them together like a jigsaw. Again, if you look at Tim's tutorial on this, you'll see how he did it. Because he was covering a bigger surface, he just created random shaped tiles and then came back in at the end and filled in any of those gaps that he didn't have the right tile shape for. But this is really pleasant to do. It's something that you shouldn't rush. Just really enjoy paper piecing all of those tile pieces together. Can you see now how my paper strips are no longer nice and neat in little piles? I did warn you things would get messy. I always start out as I mean to go on, but very infrequently do I end up in the same place. In fact, I know you'll believe me when I say that I end up working in an ever-decreasing amount of space on my craft desk. So coming back in and filling in some of those gaps. And I'm not going to make you sit through any more of that. Suffice to say is I'm going to cover all of these areas with tiles. And as you get towards the end, you've got some really teeny tiny pieces to cut in order to just finish off that little trail that will be where our butterfly sits, as if he's flown and left a tile trail behind him. That'd be a quick way to tie your bathroom, wouldn't it? So you can see how fab it looks and how you can really mix and match and use up all your paper scraps in order to create projects using this technique. It would make a fab cover on a book to completely tile it in this way. Now it's worth remembering that as you create these tile pieces, you want to make sure before you move on to the final step, which is the sort of enameling of the tiles, the glossing of the tiles, that all of your glue is dry. Because I'm working on several areas, covering several areas in the tiles, that was quite easy for me to do. Sort of do one piece like I've done one of the swirls on the page. Now I'm going to work on the top of the tag, and whilst they are drying, I can be working on the next piece of tiling. And I've also got some butterflies that I'm going to show you how to do because they're done a little bit differently in order to create a lovely patterned tile effect on your butterfly. So the final stage is to take your glossy accents, and there are similar products out there. This dries to a gloss finish and is completely see-through and clear once it's dry, and then I'm just running the glaze over each of those individual bits of paper. So I like to go around the edge first and then fill in the space that I've got in the middle. Obviously on the smaller tiles you don't quite get to do that, you just add And the trick is to try to stay exactly on the paper. Don't go off onto the grout. The nicest effect you will get is if you manage to keep everything on the paper. Although if you get the odd little bit where it doesn't quite go to plan, it isn't a great drama. But you're trying to create individual little paper tiles, and that gloss effect on the top just gives it that effect, as if you've got little pieces of porcelain on your page. So obviously when you're working on a slightly complicated shape like this, make sure you don't put your hand into the wet glaze. So be a little bit aware as you turn things around in order to work on them, where you're putting your fingers and things, so you don't spoil the gorgeous work that you've made. Another top tip that I'll give you when you're using glossy accents like this, or I think you can use diamond glaze, and Faber-Castell have their own glaze version as well, is that you keep the top of the applicator immersed in the puddle that you're creating of the glossy accents, and that way you're less likely to get bubbles. But if you do get a little bubble, then just take a pin and give it a little pop, and you'll create a lovely smooth glossy finish. So step one was to create the grout, and here's a close-up of the glossy accents going on there. Step two is to create the actual paper pieces and create the tile pattern, and then finally, when everything is dry, glaze with your glossy accents. And then you're going to leave that to dry before you work further on your project. This is actually the next day for me, and I've sketched myself a couple of butterflies. I actually took these ones off and drew around them, and then I've glued them back on. Now I think I originally used actual butterflies that already had a kind of mosaic pattern on my first tag, if I remember. It was way back in 2012. So I'm going to try and recreate that effect with my pieces of paper. I'm going to simplify it slightly. So I did start out thinking I was going to tile onto this. I was going to sort of colour the lines in afterwards, kind of do a reverse of what I've shown you already, but it doesn't work out that way. And you can see what I'm doing now is just drawing the actual pattern of tiling that I want to create. Now it's funny, I was working for quite a while before I realised the sun was peeking through my window and creating all sorts of shadows, which are probably quite annoying. So here's me practicing shadow animals. So I'm going to close the curtain and carry on. So that's got rid of the shadows, and you can see here how I've finished sketching the patterns on each of my butterflies, and this is where I decided actually I'm going to use them as a template. So I only really needed two, as you will see. So this is the butterfly, and I'm going to cut out 3 in this turquoise colour, because I'm going to be using one on the page, and I decided this one was, because it was a little bit more compact, was the best one to use as a pull on the top of the tag. So I've got 3 of these butterflies to make all together. So I've traced around them. Now whenever you trace around a template with a pencil, you do slightly enlarge the template and remove a little bit of the detail. So I always, as I'm cutting it back into shape, really come just slightly inside your pencil line, which removes it, which is quite good. You can see I'm working on the back of my paper, so I don't need to rub out any pencil lines when I've finished. And I also try to put in those details, particularly the actual sort of where the body is becomes a little bit sort of smoothed out as you draw around your template. So I'm just trying to emphasize those areas as I cut these butterfly shapes out. So I've got 3 in this shape, and I'm only going to show you how to put together one of these butterflies, but I will be doing 4 in total, and I'm going to have one of this shape, and this one is also going to be flying about on the page itself. So once again, using it as a template, this time on this red paper, or this red flowery paper. So drawing around the shape and cutting it out. Now, using all of the little segments that I've created in my sketch, I'm going to cut out each piece in turn. This one only needs to be done once, but I'm going to be doing the other butterflies 3 times each time I cut out a segment. And then I'm using those pieces as a little template. Adding some glue to my butterfly and sticking those little pieces on. And it will become more and more apparent as I go through this how this works. So some of the areas I'm going to not add paper to, so that that in effect becomes a red flowery tile part, and some I am. So this is my next little shape. It's quite fiddly, but it's quite fun to do. It's particularly working out which way around your tile piece went. That's a little tricky, so you might want to keep an eye on which was the piece for the left wing and which was the piece for the right wing. And at this point a little joke came into my head about politics and butterflies being quite neutral in the end because they've got a left wing and a right wing. That's quite topical at the moment with all the elections and things going on. So we've just had a massive change around of leaders, and I know you guys in America are going through the same thing as I am doing this tonight. And this is the best way to get away from all of it. Watch one of my videos, who cares who's running the country? There we go. And this time I'm leaving out a little strip of, as you can see when I place that second piece, to reveal the red tile butterfly underneath. And it's quite good fun deciding which piece is going to go where. And because this is going to go quite slowly, I'm going to really speed the action up. It doesn't look, actually, I have already speeded it up, but because it is quite delicate and slow anyway, it doesn't actually look like it. So I'm going to ramp it up with the final notch. So you can see here that I'm having a little bit of trouble getting that curve right, and I can't quite work out what's going on, so I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to lift that previous piece and tuck this piece underneath, and that way I get the perfect curve. I won't tell if you won't tell. So once I've got these places in position, then I just need to trim off the excess from that outside edge. And you will find that you will get a little bit of overhang anyway. So once you've got all your little pieces in position, then just come back with your scissors and trim the edges of your butterflies and make them nice and smooth again. So just adding this piece on this side and getting rid of the excess. So now how are we going to put our grouting in? So I'm going to be using a black paint pen. Make sure your glue is dry before you start work and try and keep your lines as even as possible. I'm just going to actually touch the edge of the paper butterfly as well. I'm completely colouring in the body as if it's all completely grouted, and then you can see now and again I just cut off a little bit of where I've got a little bit of rough overhang, and you can see how quickly you can turn this into a gorgeous mosaic effect. Just trimming off any raggedy edges. I'm going around the edges with my pen and then filling in those grout lines, and it just really finishes it off nicely. And that's my mosaic butterfly finished. Now I've got to repeat that process for the other 3 butterflies. You can see this is how they turned out, and I'm ready to do my grout lines. But I thought I'd add the glossy accents to the first butterfly and get that drying, exactly the same as we did on the paper mosaic on the page, try to keep your glossy accents on each of those little sections. A little bit trickier on here because your grout lines are a little bit smaller, more delicate. So again, it doesn't matter. If you can't quite manage it, you could glossy accent the whole lot and it would still look lovely. It would still look like that tile effect. And then it's time to add the line work to the other butterflies and to give them a coat of glossy accents too. So a little while later, we've got some gorgeous glossy butterflies ready to add to our tag and to our page. So I'm going to add, as usual, my Tim Holtz original inspiration to my page. So this is his April tag with his tiled bird. I'm just making this slightly smaller because I've got that curve on the mosaic work, and then I'm going to give this a black border exactly the same way, or mimicking the grouting lines on the tile work, just finishing off and giving a frame to that picture of my original inspiration. And I'm also going to outline the tag. Now I'm using a ruler. Be a little bit careful that your ruler doesn't get too messy and drag that pen onto your work. Now something else that I did, which I did off camera, was when I was doing the actual glossy accents, I decided to add a few dots exactly as I had on my tag. So I've literally just randomly dotted the glossy accents around the actual wood area of my tag, just to create another little area of interest. And now I'm just taking a fine black pen and drawing around those little bubbles that I've created. So you can't really see that they're shiny here, but you might be able to see a bit easier on the close-up photo at the end. So there's some little random glossy accent dot groups which I'm now outlining or highlighting by drawing around them with my pen. So flipping the tag over, this will be the side that has the photo memory that I'm going to attach. I'll show you that a little bit later on. Each of my tags has Tim's original tag on one side and has a memory that's either brought to me by the month or the work that I'm doing, and I add a little picture and a bit of journaling to each of my tags. So although this is an art journaling book, it also has a few memories inside as well. You can see here I'm drawing around those bubbles once they're dry and adding a little bit more interest onto my page. I have to keep tilting the tag because they're quite difficult to see against that wood grain effect. So just tilting the page so I can see where they're shining and then drawing around each of the bubbles. And of course adding that black frame all the way around the journal page exactly as I did on the tag. So that's coming together nicely, ready to attach my butterflies. Just working out which butterfly goes where. And then I'm going to attach them using glue and foam pads. So the body is going to be glued down, and then I'm just going to raise the wings slightly with some foam pads. So just press down on that center section just to make sure that body sticks to the journal page, and that will give you a little bit of difference between where the body sits and that the wings look slightly raised from the page. So just pressing down, making sure that that dries, and then adding in some little antenna. So it's really taking shape now, and the next thing that I want to do is add a quote. I'm going to use exactly the same one as I used on my original tag. So this one is by, who's it by? I've forgotten. Paper Artsy. So take time to enjoy the small things in life, which is quite appropriate considering I'm using butterflies. This one's lost its stick a little, so I'm just wiping the back with a baby wipe. So it's a cling stamp, but sometimes they do lose their stickiness. I wipe with a baby wipe or run it under the tap with some soapy water, and that will bring it back to life. And then I'm just stamping with a black Versamark. And I found this one in the pack of stamps which says memories, and I thought that was quite appropriate because there's always a little memory attached to each of my pages. Now, because you might be able to see the back of these next two butterflies because they're going to be attached front and back to my tag, I'm just colouring in the back of each of the butterflies so that if you can see any of it, it shows up as black and sort of would look like grouting. So I'm sticking one butterfly to one side of the tag and then the other butterfly to the other side. And then I'm just spending a little bit of time nipping that top area together, making sure that it dries and sort of lining them up as best I can. So on my desk there happen to be these lovely iridescent black jewels, and I thought they'd be a perfect embellishment to add to the body of the butterfly. And I'm making sure they stick by adding, because they're on the journal page, I don't want to knock them off. I'm just making sure that they are stuck down well by using tiny dots of glossy accents, even though the jewels themselves are self-stick. So I'm going to do that on the tag as well. And I'm just coming back in to the other side of the tag, and now the glossy accents is dry, going around each of the bubbles. And you can see I did just keep that detail to the outside edge, because once my photograph is stuck on there, you won't really see much of the background of the tag. Now, each of my tags also carries the date, and I've been using these Tim Holtz little letter stickers in order to add that. So I'm adding April 2016, and once again I'm also adding, just to be safe, a little bit of glue to the back of each of these stickers so that they stick down well to the top of the tag. And I just need to tuck that final number a little bit underneath the butterfly wing. There we go. Then I'm going to be adding some flowers. So I'm just punching out some flowers in the different patterned papers. So I've got some red flowers and some turquoise flowers, and I'm creating little flower centres for each. And then I'm going to punch out some black flowers and add some gems. So once I have all my elements, I'm going to layer them together. So I've got the black flower at the bottom, and you can see I'm shaping each of the layers as I go and adding a larger version of the gems that I used on the body of the butterfly. So they're a slightly iridescent black gem, and that finishes off the flowers lovely. So just slightly shaping the petals and offsetting the black flower with the turquoise flower, and then adding the little red flower to the centre. So you can build up some lovely flowers mixing and matching your papers and punches, and these work perfectly with this lovely tiled effect. And I'm just grouping them in the two diagonal corners. The trickiest part of all of this is getting the gems into the middle of the flower. Repeating that process with the red flowers in the opposite corner, so opposite diagonally. Well, that's just about my page finished. So this is my book so far. It's in 2 sections. You can see I've still got a little bit of journaling to do, but I've been adding a picture on each of my tags. Each of my pages are very different, and they all have this little U-shaped, I don't know what to call it. It's a bit like adding foam tape. It gives it a little bit of lift so that your tags fit smoothly as they pulled in and out of the pockets. So depending on the thickness of the card strips you're using, you could actually use chipboard if you wanted to, in which case you'd probably get away with 1 layer. But I'm using a normal sort of weight cardstock, and I like to use 3 strips. So placing my first strip, which is the strip across the bottom, you can see I'm just coming a little fraction above the fold line of the gusset. I'm also, as I do my left and right strips, coming slightly in from that outside edge. And I've made sure that my tags fit nicely into the remaining space. So 3 layers in total. Use glue, not double-sided tape. The reason for using glue is that you get no sticky residue once the glue is dry. Double-sided tape can, particularly if it is sticking over the edge of your strips, if your size is slightly different to your paper strips, give enough sticky residue that you might end up with a tag permanently stuck in a pocket. So I like to use glue particularly for this job. So that U shape is complete, and now I'm going to join this page into the 5 other pages. So one side, the right hand side of the page has the U shape, and the left hand side is plain. So I am now attaching it obviously to the right hand side of the previous page. So this is April joining onto March, and you want to spend a little bit of time, and that is why glue works well again, because it stays wet for a little bit longer. Make sure that those pages are lined up exactly, and pay particular attention to the gusset area. Once you've stacked these pages, you want that area to be nice and flat, because that is going to form the area that is stuck to the spine of your book. Now, as you join this together in 2 sections, a little bit more awkward because I'm joining it to 2 different heights of pages already made, but it's the time that you take pushing this down, making sure that it's lined up, that will give you the neat effect once you're finished. So that's my April page joined to March, and now I'm going to join that to May and June. So May and June are already joined together. So once again, I'm making sure that those pages line up at the top, the sides and the bottom. And you can see how different, as these pages flick backwards and forwards, each of these pages have turned out. Particularly fond of May because May is my birthday. So I'm just making sure that's nice and lined up. And I would say at this stage, put your tags in to make sure that they fit nicely, but don't leave them in while it's drying. Just let it dry off first and then put your tags in. That way you definitely won't stick them in by mistake. So just a little run through, quick tidy up to the side. So far we have got January, which was a chalkboard and metal effect page with Tim's original inspiration on the back of the tag. This was February, obviously romantic tones here, me and my husband Ivan, and that's the memory I've chosen, and that was Tim's original tag. February always makes you think about Valentine's Day. This is March. I haven't actually journaled in this yet, but I've got my pictures ready, and this was Tim's original tag. Nice and bright and cheerful, this page. And you can see even with the bulk of that corrugated card, that tag slipped in quite nicely. And this was my page for April, and I've journaled about the fact that I love tea parties. That's what these sort of china pieces reminded me of, little old-fashioned tea sets, and that is the memory going in that pocket. this was May. And again, this one's just waiting for its journaling. Journaling sometimes takes a little while for me to get on top of. And this is June, and obviously this tag still waiting for its memory. Doesn't have a page to join it to until we join it into the album itself. So I'm not sure when I'm going to make the cover, whether I'll wait till the end or I'll just fit it in somewhere in between all the videos as I catch up. So I've got this page for July, so I've got 5 more pages left to do and see if I can fit that in before the end of the year. Fingers crossed. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. This is my November page getting ready. So I've got my picture already, and this was Tim's November tag, so definitely autumn feel to my memory. So I hope that I've inspired you either to pop along to Tim's blog and join in with his 12 tags of 2016 challenge, or perhaps to play along with me and make journal pages based on his tags. It really is a fun way to look at lots and lots of different techniques and to have a little bit of inspiration when you need it. And I hope that this video, and all of my videos in fact, inspire you to get creative. So until next time, big thank you for all your lovely messages, and I don't always get a chance now to reply to them all, but I definitely reply if you have a question, but I do read them and they always make me want to make more videos. So keep up the good work and I will keep videoing. So until next time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, the share button, and get creative. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you for watching. So as usual, here are the links. This is the link to all of the journal pages that I've created so far. So far there are 7 videos in total with lots and lots of different techniques for you to try. Why not click on this tutorial and find out how to make beautiful graphic 45 papers into a mixed media canvas. Or alternatively, you could learn how to turn those video boxes you might still have in your collection into gorgeous storage or mini albums like this one. So you can see I've gone to town with one particular graphic 45 collection here with this set of videos, and there's also a gorgeous little trinket box which you could really make in any of the papers that you have in your collection. And I know you've got lots just like me, and you can either store shells in it like I am here, or you could use them as gift boxes. Perfect to make along with your cards to give your presents at this time of year. So last but not least, I'll point you in the direction of my Etsy workshop where I sell online workshops, and I can show you how to make this tag storage. If you love making tags, this is the project for you. And this is a Christmas version, so I made 25 tags, and one year, maybe this year will be the year, I'll fill the opposite side of the tags with journaling and photographs for a Christmas countdown. A great way to use this project. If not, you can make them in any style you like and store the tags that you make for inspiration on your desk. I'll see you over there. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.